You're listening to The Loose Shaker. My name is Chris Mellon, and you're lost on the internet. In this cast, I'll be doing beer, wine, and liquor tastings, along with teaching a few cocktail recipes. Today I'll be tasting Bulleit Kentucky Straight Bourbon. This whiskey is an American bourbon, meaning it must be at least 51% corn in the mash. It is also a straight bourbon, meaning it has been aged for at least 4 years in oak barrels. The straight designation also means it has not been blended with any other whiskeys or spirits. Lastly, the Kentucky Declaration means it was distilled in the state of Kentucky within the United States. Bulleit has gone further than these minimum requirements, aging their bourbon for at least 6 years before bottling. The mash is unique with just over 2/3 corn, 4% malted barley, and most importantly, the remainder is comprised of rye. This high rye mash content brings with it a flavor that takes a few steps towards the herbal taste of a rye whiskey. Bulleit is owned by Diageo, the owners of Smirnoff. This line was introduced in 1999 and retails for about $30 US. I'll be contrasting this bourbon with Bulleit's straight rye whiskey to give you, dear listener, a clear idea of the difference between these two types of spirits. I have 3 glasses in front of me, 2 for the whiskeys and 1 for water. Let's get started. I'll be starting with the rye and moving on to the bourbon. By doing this, we will essentially be replacing a large portion of the rye mash with corn. With everything else staying the same, we'll be able to tease out the taste change that corn brings, getting to the main difference between these two styles of American whiskey, being their mash composition. So we'll start with the rye, which I've already done. That herbal and caramel, it's kind of like lawn clippings and like caramel candy. It smells great. Very herbal. Definitely tastes like it smells. And then when you get the bitter oak, that cuts the taste of the caramel and you get the herbal taste in the finish. So I'll wash that down with some water now. We'll try to figure out what the taste change is by adding corn in their bourbon. I don't smell the herbal smell anymore. I just smell the corn and the alcohol. The sweet caramel and the alcohol, I should say. That is much more of the caramel flavor. The herbal taste, that kind of lawn clipping smell, is totally gone. That taste is almost totally gone. I can feel a little bit just because I'm onto the aftertaste now, but that is, just the caramel is all I taste. Now that I'm in the end, I got a tiny little bit of oak, which makes me think that the actual bitter at the end, maybe it's less the oak wood, and maybe it's more the actual rye that gives it that balanced flavor at the end and allows you to taste those herbal notes. What I'm tasting here is like a little bit of candy. It kind of tastes like a candy that has not been hardened yet. But then at the end, you only get a tiny little bit of that bitter from the oak. So I think the bitterness in the rye is far more owed to the rye itself and less to the barrel. And that is very evident in contrasting these two whiskeys, which are made in almost the exact same way, save for the mash. Now, one more thing that I should mention is bourbon is not required to be made in first fill barrels, or aged in first fill barrels. So rye is. So I don't know if these are refill, third fill, or what's going on there. But those two things, I think, are the main difference that accounts for these two different types of whiskey. If you want something that's just sweet, easy to drink by itself, and doesn't have a whole lot of complexity, maybe you want to just have the sweet whiskey taste for a cocktail, Bulleit Bourbon is great. If you want something that you will enjoy and drink for a long period of time, I would say the Bulleit Rye is great. This is for something if you're only going to pour a single and enjoy it over the evening, and that's all you'll have. You might want something with more complexity and interesting taste, and the Bulleit Rye fits that bill. Also, if you're making a spirit-forward cocktail that's specifically whiskey, chances are you probably actually want to use rye. There's more complexity there. There are some cocktails that really you need bourbon because it requires that sweet taste. But if you're making something like an old-fashioned, like we are next week, you'll want to use the rye whiskey. That's the end of today's tasting. We'll be making old fashions next week. For that, you'll need a shopping list of your chosen whiskey. I recommend the Bulleit Rye for this particular cocktail. You should also have a bag of granulated sugar, a bottle of Angostura bitters, and a bottle of orange bitters. That's going to be it. See you next week.